Okay. All right. I'm losing. Hello, everyone. Somehow I've managed to lose my voice again. I don't know what the deal is, but we're here for Real World, Real Faith. And today we're going to hear from Liz Pruchnicki. She joined our staff as Director of Youth Ministries in June 2018. Her background is in international relations. She's worked at the U.S. Department of State and the Office of Religion and Global Affairs, as well as at Wesley Theological Seminary's Center for Public Theology on Capitol Hill. She has a master's in international relations, as well as in theological studies. She's interested in the interaction between religion and political life, especially in using Christian ethics as a framework to evaluate pop culture that is relevant to the lives of Immanuel's teens. She is an avid reader of teen fiction and travel nonfiction. She lives within walking distance of multiple farmers markets, and she loves gardening. Liz wrote this introduction, by the way. And as I said in my sermon today, she's been around since before 2018, of course, as someone who first started coming to the evening service, and then started singing with the evening service, and joined the church, and then became a staff member. And one of the many things that I love about Liz, as I said in the sermon, is her laugh. And that brings me such joy, and hopefully we'll get to hear that laugh today. But anyway, over to you, Liz.
Thank you so much. There will be no jokes. There will be no laughter. This is a very serious Real World, Real Faith. I'm just so honored to be asked to do a Real World, Real Faith and to have a chance to talk with you and share a little bit about myself and then answer some questions. When I wrap up, I'm going to keep an eye on time because I think I could just talk ad nauseum about myself. So, so if anyone gets bored, feel free to raise a hand or something, and I'll start to wrap it up. So I grew up in Iowa. I'm from Des Moines, Iowa. I was raised United Methodist, and I went to church a ton. But I only went to church a lot after confirmation. Before confirmation, I never ever went to church. Then my parents said that I had to be confirmed, and I said cool. And after that, I realized how cool my church was, and there were 45 kids in the youth ministry program, and it was there was always something you could do. So I was at church 4 to 6 days a week, actually. In that time, I think I learned nothing about Jesus. I think we mentioned Jesus once, maybe. And so, but I went to church every Sunday as part of it, and so I would get some Jesus there. And then the youth group was so much fun. We were way too busy having fun to talk about Jesus ever. But the one thing that thank you for laughing at that, Alma. The one thing that my upbringing in the church gave me was the knowledge that I could always go back. It was a happy place. It was a kind place. It was a place that cultivated a lot of confidence and love for myself as a teen and also within a community. I always joke with kids and with families who have kids who are nervous to do public speaking or something. I always say that if your kid comes up front and breathes in air and converts it into carbon dioxide, and then goes and sits back down, someone will say, "My God, that was the best thing I've ever seen. You are remarkable. You have such a natural gift." And because of that, because the church is such a place where you, especially young people, can come and just sort of do a thing, sing a song, give a children's message, be present in any way. It's so good for young formation, just to be surrounded with really bottomless encouragement. And so that was how I felt about the church. I felt generally positive about it, but had remarkably little knowledge of theology or the Bible or anything. But the most important thing was that I really just felt like it was a positive place. and that I could go back to it at some point in my life if I needed to. And so I went to college. I went to Syracuse in upstate New York, in central New York. If you're from New York, it's central New York. If you're from anywhere else, it's upstate New York. Thank you, Dana. So at Syracuse, Syracuse was a long way from Iowa, and I hated it. I hated it so much. I know that this is being recorded for posterity. I hated Syracuse so much. I was desperately lonely from like the moment I got there until probably like my last semester. My last semester was fine, but nobody had ever met anyone from Iowa before. I was the most exotic thing. I was like a test subject where people would just say the most ridiculous things, and I was not interested in it in the slightest. And so I was incredibly lonely. So that was my freshman year. I came back to Iowa and had like the best summer with my friends from Iowa who knew what it was like to be from Iowa. And then the day that I was going back to Syracuse, I cried for like the whole day because I didn't want to go back. And while I was at Syracuse, I was a theater kid growing up, and I was always really interested in singing. I really liked to sing. And one of my friends had asked in that summer if I was singing or if I joined a choir or something. And so I'd auditioned for a ton of choirs in my first year, and I got rejected from every single one of them. You would do a tryout for a lot of clubs at Syracuse, and I got rejected from every single one. And so August of 2012, when I was going back to Syracuse, I went to church because I knew it was the one place they literally could not reject me. I was like, I need to do something where someone can say no, where someone cannot say you're not good enough. And so I went to church, and I did the thing you do when you go to a church for the first time. I sat in the very back corner, and I hid as best as possible. And there was such a good welcoming committee at this church, I'm sure very similar to here, where as soon as worship ended, actually no, they did the passing of the peace there. This was obviously pre-COVID, so they had a big passing of the peace culture. So like 3 minutes into the service, my parents were with me that day because I just moved in. And so my mom, my dad, and I were sitting in the very back pew, and then during the passing of the peace, there was like an onslaught. Oh my gosh, these people were naturals. One woman, Barbara, I remember in particular, Barbara Foot was very, very meaningful in my life. And she came up and she said, "Hello, you're new, tell me about, what brings you here today?" And then within the 4-minute passing of the peace time, I'd said, "I really like singing, I'd like to join a choir." And so she like ran up and grabbed the choir director. And then it was like, "This is the choir director, they meet on Thursdays at 7. We'll see you then." And so it was a very intentional like process of introduction and figuring out all of the things for me, so I didn't have to do it. And by then, they knew me and they knew to look for me. So I had to go on Thursday, and the choir was so wonderful. So like I went from feeling very, very lonely and isolated in Syracuse to at least twice a week having things that involved people, and even better, involved people that were not just 18 to 22-year-olds, which felt really, really important to me. That next Sunday, I went to church again, and I sat in the very, very back row. And some of you know this story, and some of you don't, but it's the cutest story ever, so get ready. So I was sitting in the very back row again, and my parents had long gone home by this point. And we stood up to sing the first hymn, and I was standing there with my hymnal open, and then in walks Billy Klutz. And so Billy walks in, and he had come from another church service that he was playing for, so he walked in a little late, and he leaned over to me and he said, what hymn are we singing?" And so I told him, and then I just stepped a little closer to him, and I said, we can share. And so we sang that one hymn together and then sat together throughout the worship service. And then we were talking after worship. and, you know, just sort of introducing ourselves. And I said, I'm brand new at this church. I'm an undergrad here. Billy was in grad school getting his MPA. And he was also interested in joining the choir, but had more scheduling conflicts, so he couldn't make it very regularly. So that's how Billy and I met. That next Thursday in choir, this church was right down the hill from Syracuse, so it was easily walkable. And so that Thursday night after choir practice that he'd come to, he was like, a friend of mine, Billy has such this wonderful spirit of invitation about him. He was like, a friend of mine is having a party a couple blocks away if you want to come. And I was like, I have nothing to do. So that sounds great. And so ever since then, that whole year that we were together in Syracuse was just Billy signing me up for things really against my will. I love him so dearly, and like, if I don't know if I would have, I know I would have said no to so many of those things if I had like other friends or like other options or something, but like, I always adored him, but I did not want to do the weird Christian things he wanted to do. Like he would sign us up to do skits on Saturday night for like a campus ministry thing, like things that had no interest to me whatsoever, and still don't really have that much interest to me. Billy would just say, "Well, I went ahead and signed us up," and I'd be like, well, I guess that's what we're gonna do. And so I sang in like this big choir with him when they were doing the installation of the new bishop. I did all of these big extracurricular Methodist things that I never knew existed, never really cared to know existed, all because I wanted a friend, and the friend that was really reaching out and extending those invitations wanted to do that in a particular way. We also had fun together, like, let the record show. We also like went to diners and had fun outside of church singing and stuff. But those were the things that Billy really brought me into, that I was like, I guess I'm here. I guess this is what we're gonna do. That never stopped also. Like, Billy still does that, which is really funny. While at that church was called University United Methodist Church in Syracuse, New York. They were reconciling ministry. My church growing up was also a reconciling congregation, Grace United Methodist Church. So I always grew up in a world where queer inclusion wasn't was there, nobody even talked about it because it was just very, very normal. And so at University United Methodist Church with Billy, I very, very slowly started to change some of my thinking. I grew up in Des Moines. My family's pretty conservative, pretty conservative, financially conservative. So when I was in 8th grade, I had to write a paper about my hero's hero or something. So I wrote about my dad, whose hero was Ronald Reagan. and so sort of after that, through that conversation, I was like, all right, I guess one of my heroes now is gonna be Ronald Reagan. And I didn't think it that explicitly, but that sort of idea about the world was certainly how I was raised, and had no interest in questioning that idea. So my dad grew up in an Irish-Polish, super poor immigrant neighborhood in the south side of Chicago, and my mom grew up in very, very rural Iowa, and became an international flight attendant with TWA when she was in her early 20s. And so, both of them had this very bootstrappy attitude about the world. Government should be small, should stay out of your lives. The government should be very fiscally conservative, and that's sort of how I thought about the world. And when I met Billy, some of those things started to change a little bit. Not aggressively, Billy never said that seems wrong. Billy was always a very, very gentle piece of encouragement in my ear. But at that party that he took me to the first time that we met, he was talking to some of his friends who were all getting their masters in public administration, and Billy said, "I just don't understand why, Domino's doesn't give their employees health insurance, and we all pay 10 cents more for a pizza." And I said out loud, "I don't want to do that. I would rather Domino's not give their employees health insurance." Because that was just like totally my mindset was like, people can take care of themselves, and it's a choice. It's a choice to take care of yourself or not. And there were multiple examples like that throughout my life where I look back and I think, oh my God, my thinking has changed so much about so many things. I can't believe I used to think these, let alone say them out loud. And that was certainly one of those moments. And I remember in that conversation, Billy just sort of saying like, okay, and then moving on. And that's just always how our relationship went. We would talk a lot about, Billy was always much more interested in political life and in thinking about the consequences of political life, much more interested in that than I ever was, and he just sort of brought them up into conversation and gave me opportunities to reflect on what it really was anyway that I thought about these things. And that was also true at University United Methodist Church. They were really involved in like William Barber's The Poor People's Campaign. They were very focused on social justice. The congregation was in a really poor part of town, and so it was very focused on outreach within the community. In Syracuse itself was a refugee hub, so there were just always folks coming from around the world in the congregation who were brand new and like in need of orienting. And it was a place where where sort of the veneer about what I thought about the world started to crack a little bit. It didn't crack fully, it didn't crack quickly. There was no moment where I said, oh gosh, I might be wrong. It just happened really, really slowly over time through some of these conversations. Later that year, when I was later in college, I studied abroad in Spain, and when I got back from Spain, I was like, wow, that was the most wonderful semester, because I wasn't at Syracuse. How can I do more of that? How can I do more of being away from my college? But I knew my parents weren't really interested in paying for more of it. So I did a study abroad in the summer of 2013 to Israel to study counterterrorism, which was all the rage then. And I did it because it was the one study abroad program that was paid for. I would have gone anywhere. I would have gone absolutely anywhere, and that was the one that was paid for, and I was like, cool, that sounds great. And so I went to Israel. I'd always loved to travel. My mom and dad had the coolest stories because as a flight attendant, my mom would fly. She was an international flight attendant, would fly Chicago, London, Rome, Paris, all of the cool places. And she would take my dad with her all the time. And so I just grew up with a real craving of seeing the world and doing these sorts of things. And so when I was in Israel, we were taking classes for 3 weeks. And so often, the course material would come back to faith. It would always come back to, we're talking about terrorism in the Levant today, so we need to talk about Abraham. And I'd be like, what? And I was the most interested in the sort of religion background that we would have to do in these courses. And so, I would just ask dozens and dozens of questions when we were in class or on tours or something, because it always came, every single class, talking about the food, they'd be like, so we have to go back to Abraham, and it was always coming back into the conversation. And I went to church. I was the only one who was even remotely religious in the group, and could answer some questions, but most I couldn't. And what that experience did was made me really, really interested in this interaction between faith and political life. And so that used to really manifest itself in an interest in geopolitics, which is why when I interned at the State Department, that felt like the thing I wanted. But it was 2017. It was a miserable time to be in the State Department. And I never want to go back to the federal government because it was so bad. My office moved 3 times. Basically, all I did when I was at the State Department was pack up boxes and move them from office to office. It was a wild, wild time. And it just wasn't what I was really as interested in. I knew I was still interested in this interaction between faith and political life, the idea that so many of our values are similar, are at least reducible to mutual desires, that we can, if you've read Getting to Yes, that's the famous interest versus positions-based negotiation. And so much of faith is just in learning how to talk to one another, learning how to listen to one another, knowing enough about somebody's culture and interests that you can build common ground. And that's really what I thought I was interested in. That has moved away as my primary interest, but that's how I really came to think of myself, and my interest in faith was I am a Christian person. I like going to worship. I like the communal focus it gives my life, and I think it could be really powerful to do these things bridging with other communities as well. So when I was still in Syracuse, like I said, has a big refugee center, and they would host these interfaith dialogue circles. And so twice a year, hundreds of people throughout Syracuse of different faiths would come together and have dinner. And somebody would work very hard to make sure that there was a religious diversity at every single one of these dinners. And it was a wonderful place where I got to really think about what Christianity meant, being Methodist meant, and so after a couple of those dinners, we also had dialogue circles, which was a more focused thing for 6 weeks while you're talking about your different faiths with people. And so I did one of those dialogue circles, and then I led one of those dialogue circles the next year. And in these spaces, I would just always walk away feeling like I knew less, like there was so much more to know and to think about with my faith. The wonderful thing about interfaith is that so often people will be suspicious of it because they think it will make you love your own faith less in favor of a wishy-washy togetherness. But in fact, in most cases, it makes you fall in love with your faith more because you have to think about it. Because you really have to think about what it means to take communion, to show up on Sunday mornings. And when you're talking about those things with people who have a totally different style of worship and togetherness, you come to really appreciate your traditions. And you also come to love them with space, that there's things to admire and honor in your counterpart's faith tradition as well. So that was always incredibly meaningful. When I went to around this time, because I was so fired up by these questions that I was having, I applied to grad school, and I wanted to study that relationship between faith and political life, and so my master's is in international relations, and then I had no interest in going to seminary. Billy gave my name to the Office of Admissions at Wesley and told them that I was very interested. And so I was in a Barnes & Noble one day in 2015 when I got a call that was hi, my name is Nick Works, and I got your name from this person. And I was I'm not really interested. He was well, tell me about yourself. And so we started talking, and then at the end of that conversation, he was I'll waive your application fee, and I was fine. And I was applying to grad school anyway, so I was whatever, I've got the materials, might as well. And then like the more interaction I had with Wesley and what a seminary education would do, the more I just fell in love with it. Seminary is a different sort of graduate school. Like there is care, there's a community focus in addition to all of the wild things that you learn in seminary. And so, but it was such an accident that I ended up there. And then throughout my time in seminary, the study of ethics is really what interested me with Christian life, because some of those questions started to make a little bit more sense about how we interact with one another in our communities. So Christian ethics and theologians have been thinking for a very, very long time about what our obligations are to one another and to whom we owe authority. And it helped me think about the world in more ways. And so when I think about sort of my trajectory in my faith from when I was growing up, I just did church because it was fun and I didn't think about it at all. So when I think about my faith and I think about my choosing it, it really comes back to when I was in early college and just desperately lonely and interested in human interaction of any kind, which really led me to develop a spirit of empathy, realizing that like most people's lives are not like mine. Most people's lives are totally different and have different experiences, and that's such an obvious thing, and yet is completely groundbreaking if you let it inform how you want the world to work. And so when I started to like let myself be changed, let myself be a little bit more open to the possibility that like I actually didn't know. The way I'd been thinking about the world was maybe a little harsh. And maybe just not true for most people. I was so much more interested in staying that skeptical throughout. And so when I was in seminary, when I was like taking classes, my first reaction would always be like, this is new. I'm not gonna come to a conclusion on that yet. I'm not sure I know enough. And so that has always, that's been the biggest thing that I've taken away from my interaction with my faith, and my journey in Christianity has had a real impact on my life, not just in like coming to worship and liking it, but like I am a radically different person and a radically better person. Like, it is no question to me that this version of Liz is more palatable and more interesting and a better addition to the world than the one before. And it makes me very excited and endeared that people who come into a space like this are willing to be open to what others are pushing them to do. And I'm just desperately and earnestly hopeful about Christian life together. At some point, this is the last thing I'll say, and then I'll turn it over to questions. At some point, I became PCUSA because Billy was PCUSA. They wouldn't ordain him in the United Methodist Church, so he became PCUSA, and I wasn't going to go to church if Billy wasn't there, so that's how I ended up here. And throughout my time at Immanuel, there has been such a spirit of jumping in, of improvisational worship leadership. That was particularly true of the evening service, where it felt like there were never rules and we could just break whatever we wanted and do anything. And as long as you got up there and took in air and converted it into carbon dioxide, people would be pleased. And then developing throughout the past couple of years more comfort. Those of you who knew me in 2015 when I first came to Immanuel would know that I would never ever pray. I refused to pray. I did not know how to do it. It felt weird and I didn't like it. And then Billy would just sort of say, all right, Liz is gonna lead this prayer. Liz is gonna lead this prayer. And I'd be like, what? And then Aaron did it too. And I was like, okay. I guess I'm leading these things now. And it's been such a community of just like, I trust you, even if you don't trust you, jump in. That has been a real space where I've been enabled and empowered to do different sorts of things that I'm super, super grateful for. that is where I will leave my stuff. What questions do you all have? Did I do it right, Fran? Okay, I did. Okay, yay. Oh, that's so, yeah. The next thing on my journey is I've been working part-time at Immanuel and at Wesley Theological Seminary in the Office of Admissions. I've been doing that part-time together since 2019, and I'm just going full-time at my other job. It'll be my first full-time job ever. It's very exciting. Yeah, Terry.
I just wanted to say I loved your talk. It was very entertaining and interesting, and the whole journey process was really nice to hear. And I especially liked, I trust you, even though you don't trust you. Is that what you said? Yeah. I think that should go in our bulletin. That's what Christianity is all about, to be vulnerable, to put yourself out there, to be changed, to be in community, and that just sums it up very nicely.
Thank you so much, Terry.
Liz, first of all, and I won't be the only one to say this, thank you for your leadership of Women of Spirit over the past few years. It's been a wonderful experience. I was struck by the amazing, the things that have happened to you and that have changed you over the last roughly 10, 11 years. And I'm wondering if you have a feeling of what's next for you in terms of your spiritual journey.
Oh, gosh.
Maybe that's too hard to come up with, but do you have a sense of direction?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I have. I do think about that because your relationship to the church changes when you are paid by it. And so, surprisingly, and so I do think about that a lot, that the churches that I've been so honored to be a part of have been really, I'm just excited to like go back to church and have no responsibilities. That sounds great. and to be just, to just see new things in worship and to like be moved by different styles of worship. I'm really, really excited about. I think that's the biggest thing, and I do think about that a lot. I've been in a number of faith communities, and they've all been different. They've all had amazing preaching, so good that you sort of find yourself in trouble because you're like, they could ask me to do something wild, and I would be inclined to say yes to it. Like they're preaching that is so good that you're like, oh my God, someone's changing my mind right now, and so I'm like excited to get back to the roots of things that like got me really excited about my faith in the first place. Just to like, and a lot of that will be made possible by, being in, by just having a different relationship to what's going on in the community. Not to say that doesn't happen here, but it happens in a different way, It's different when you're responsible for the group than when you're just like, oh, something wonderful's happening, cool. Yeah, Elizabeth.
I want to congratulate, maybe it was Aaron, who put you in charge of Women of Spirit. And those of us who've been in this group for years, it is just, your leadership has just catapulted us into a different realm that I never anticipated. And you give the best prayers.
She's so fucking.
And so for you to say it only happened because Billy said, and Liz will lead the prayer. And so he needs to say many more things. I can see, and Liz will lead the congregation. I'm excited to hear your sermon, but I've been so impressed with your mastery of biblical information that we're on a endless study of Job at
Thanks.
Bravo to you.
Thanks be to God. Thank you. Yeah, Roger.
Thank you for all your contributions. Simple question. My dad worked for the United Nations. I grew up international and worldly. I don't know anything else. Help me out from your perspective from Iowa. Then you went to Spain. Can you give us an idea of your perspective on life and the world from Iowa and then after returning from Spain?
What do you mean about my perspective about the world?
Meaning, you were in Iowa, you never experienced different, I presume, help me out, different culture, different languages. In Europe, you get on the train and in a couple hours you speak a different language, different culture.
Yeah. So this is actually what was so difficult about Syracuse, was that I grew up in Des Moines, Iowa. Des Moines was a refugee hub when I was growing up. My elementary school welcomed hundreds of refugees from the former Yugoslavia. So like my elementary and middle school experience was partially, Des Moines also is urban, it's small urban, it's a small city. And my experience growing up was very small city, so it wasn't suburbia, it wasn't overwhelmingly white. It became more white the more, like, by the time I was in high school, it got a little bit less diverse, but like really formative years were incredibly diverse actually. And most of that is due to the fact that I grew up in the city proper. And then a part of that also was that my parents loved to travel. They were abroad over 9/11 when I was 8, and so they never wanted to travel, they never wanted to go out of the country again after that. But I grew up with all of these stories about, all of the fun things that they had done. And then when I was really old enough to do them for myself, they were like, yeah, we're not interested in that. So every year that I was in high school, every summer actually, I did lots of study abroad immersion things. So my church was very cool and big, and so we went to England when I was 14, and the next year I spent the summer in Italy, and the summer after that I spent a summer in Russia, and then I went to, so there were a lot of, I never felt sheltered. I was sheltered in some ways, but I never felt like the world out there was alien. And then I got to Syracuse, and everyone was like, you must be nothing, And it was, I think I felt so betrayed by the culture shock of Syracuse, because culture shock wasn't new to me. And I felt even more alienated because people assumed that this would be the first time that I was doing anything interesting. And so my experiences of doing anything, of traveling anywhere, have always been the remarkable confidence and that you just sort of have to have, that you just sort of have to build when you're like, I am here and I need to get to point B. And I have to do it. It's 2008 and cell phones aren't super common yet. So I will get on a bus and I will just look at the bus driver and say, hello. Hello, I need to go to the airport. And then, and sort of hope for the best. So in that, travel and meeting new people has always been a really important part of my story. Being open and empathetic and particularly interested in people's stories, has always been really important in my life. And a lot of that comes from the really amazing opportunities that I did have growing up. Yeah, Corrine.
What you described in your relationship with Billy is not really mentoring, it's sort of peer dragging along. But
friendship. I like to say friendship.
Have you now yet had an opportunity to develop that kind of relationship, either a mentoring or peer dragging along, with another individual, or do you see yourself doing that in the future?
I don't think of my relationship with Billy in those ways, so I don't find it, I don't I don't like look out into the world thinking like, all right, here's the person that I'm going to be very proximate to, and listen to and be empathetic. And so, because like Billy has had such, like Billy's role in my life, like sort of has been peer dragging along, mentoring, like let's talk about the world. But that was just a part of our friendship, So throughout as much of that, there has been gossiping and meanness and delightful things. And that like life together just encourages. And so like I would love, like Billy jokes all the time that, when he gets to heaven, he's gonna have 1 on his scorecard of like, okay, I changed one person's life. and St. Peter's gonna be like, hopefully cool with that. But I've never like got into the world looking for someone that I was gonna do that to, because it was never intentional. It was just what happened. It's just how our relationship unfolded, really. Yeah, Cheryl?
So I think that you are selling yourself short a little, because I think you have very much done that, particularly with the youth of our community. And I think that, but you've done it with us, and we feel like you've done it with me. And I think it's your spirit of like openness and positivity. And not everyone has worked on a committee with Liz where you had to deal with budgets. But I mean, this is a person who can bring this joy and openness, but also can, work on budgets and not have it become cranky and unpleasant. And these are for type A people, like a lot of people in this room that, probably get too uptight with doing things. I love your story for my kids and for all of us of like, yeah, I really didn't know what I was doing there, but I was following something that was interesting. I was following something that gave me joy. I listened to a good friend. I mean, I think what I see in your story is like an openness to both life and joy and affirmation that we can all really learn from.
That is like the goal I have for youth ministry, is like that has always been like the goal, is like, okay, if there is a theme or a thesis to leave or to bring it, to thread through conversations with these kids over 4 or 5 years, is like, it's okay if you don't believe. It's okay if you have questions or you think you don't have questions or whatever. Like the being together is what is really moving. And like it is worth building a life around being in community with others. Yeah.
Just a practical question, and I'm sure it's a good thing it didn't work out that way, but did you consider transferring to a different school?
I know, right? I did, but it was so stupid. I was like, I did, but I was like, this is a good school. I should stay. It was dumb.
Oh, no, that was Billy there.
He was only there for a year, so so junior and senior year I was like on my own again. But junior year I studied abroad in Spain, and then senior I did graduate early because I hated it. So so there's that. Yeah.
Liz, I'd like to thank you for a beautiful description of your life journey. Liz knows we've never had a conversation in all the time she's been here. Now I feel like I know you so well. I'm sorry we haven't had a And one other point, I was so concerned because Erin said, oh, she's got the best laugh I've ever heard. The first thing you said was, there's no laugh.
There's no jokes. No jokes.
But thank you for being such a joyous person that you could not help yourself. And I got to hear your laugh.
Oh, thank you so much. Thanks be to God. Thank you, guys. Alrighty.
So, any final questions for Liz? If not, Liz, I know we've got you for a couple more weeks. Excited about that. Excited about listening to you preach in a couple weeks. Glad for all the work you've done here and being
told me that I brought too much new convert energy. He said, "You are particular about Presbyterianism." Yeah, I just have to share that story. I love our working relationship very much. It's been very open to my insistence on certain Presbyterian things that people who are born Presbyterian don't care about. But when you come into the tradition, you're like, you guys have all these cool things.
Yeah.
We should talk about them.
So what's really funny, and then we'll wrap up, because we could have this wrap our page for a while, but